Hi, my name is Matt Hackler. I am an editor at large with the University of Louisiana Press and the Vice President of Strategic Capacity Development with Feeding America. I'm here with Zella Palmer. Zella is an educator, food historian, and filmmaker. She is the chair and director of the Ray Charles Program in African American Material Culture at Dillard University. And most pertinent to our conversation today, she is the author of the recently published by the University of Louisiana Press, Recipes and Remembrances of Fair Dillard, 1869 to 2019. So we're excited today to be having a conversation about the book, about Zella's work, and really about what's going on in the field and to get the benefit of Zella's insights as a practitioner and a recorder of food history and as an academic and engaged community member around these issues. So
Thank
Zella,
you.
thank you so much. Thanks for having this conversation.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to have this conversation.
Zella and I are both engaged in the world of food and in the world of
Yeah,
food as it intersects with life. And so I think it's going to be a lively conversation. Thanks
absolutely.
very much for joining.
Thank you.
So, Z- Zella and I are going to start off by talking a little bit about Dillard University as a place. Zella,
Mm,
you are a member of that community.
mhm,
You are engaged there as a person who works there. You're engaged there as a person who makes meaning there, who trains up people on that campus, and you're
mhm.
also chronicling it, kind of occupying a unique position as a historian and food historian in particular. So, our first few questions, I want to talk a little bit about what makes Dillard Dillard, especially as a place where food ways happen and food
Mm,
comes to make meaning for people. So,
mm,
um, in reading your book, one of the first things that struck me was that it feels like I feel the book clearly demonstrates that Dillard has embraced food as a cultural tool or a vehicle for connection and meaning making for a long, long time, many decades,
mhm,
maybe
mhm,
since its inception. What
mhm.
do you think it is in your experience about the university that accounts for this unique relationship with food and food ways?
Well, I believe that Dillard University is a communiversity. I believe that just my experience of working there, knowing about it in high school, and family members knowing about Dillard University when I was a child, and it represents the long legacy and traditions of HBCUs across the country. But New Orleans is a very special place, and universities like Dillard University, Xavier University, and from the beginning, they have always created a unique space for students, community, faculty, and staff. And in particular, Dillard University, just because of who were the founding members in, because it was two universities that actually
Hmm.
merged in 1935, New Orleans and Straight University, which was founded in 1869 and then eventually merged to our campus now in Gentilly in 1935. And it's the only HBCU that was purposefully architecturally designed with the mindset that we wanted to create a safe space for students and be in a loving environment before they might go out into a cruel world. And when you think about 1935, I mean, this is during Jim Crow South era, a lot was going on. And the first, well, not the first president, but one of the most significant Dillard University presidents was Albert W. Dent. And, President Dent, he lived through so much and guided Dillard University through so much through World War II, the Great Migration, the Civil Rights Movement, the Black Power movement. I mean, just
Hmm.
so many, the Korean War, just everything. And so along with his wife, Jessie Covington Dent, who was a graduate of Juilliard in New York, were able to create this space that was reflective of the culture of New Orleans, and specifically the African American community or Creole of color community, to create a space where students could thrive, and with education as the most important, the most significant aspect of the university, and of course, Christian values.
Hmm. So you use the term communiversity, and when I was reading the book, especially early on in the book, you talk about fundraising suppers,
Mm,
and that very community-based sort of using food to achieve
hmm.
a community goal, right?
Sure.
I work in the charitable feeding space. I mean, anyone who's ever fundraised knows, let's put
Mhm.
on a show, let's do a potluck, let's use food to bring people around and achieve
Yeah,
a goal, and sometimes to raise money. So the
right.
idea of a communiversity, I think, is an interesting one, and I wonder why, in your explanation, it sounds like that was just, it's natural for New Orleans and maybe
Mhm.
natural for HBCUs,
Yeah.
but I wonder, it seems it could have gone another way.
Mhm.
Universities have in some ways been spaces where they're differentiators, right?
Mhm.
Well,
Mhm.
the academic world needs to be clearly separate from the non-academic world.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
for example, even in the study of folklore, we see, okay, well, this is happening in the community, we're going to go back with our lens as
Mhm.
the practitioners of folkloristics to look
Sure.
at this dispassionate third-party observers. But what
Mhm.
you describe is just a willful embrace and a commingling. There's no academic dispassion. There is a fundraising suppers could happen on site.
Yes.
Is that New Orleans? I mean, it seems very intentional that there's no separation at all. No, we are the university and that is the neighborhood.
Well, things have changed. I mean, when you think about the things have changed, but they still remain the same.
Hmm.
And just going back to 1935, and just understanding that the Jim Crow South didn't allow for African Americans to dine in restaurants, and there weren't that many Black-owned restaurants. There were majority sandwich shops. I mean, if you know the story of Leah Chase, her in-laws, they had sandwich shops. And so the places where African Americans could eat were mostly in the home, at functions or events. And the ones in the university, Dillard University and places like Xavier University were the places where African Americans could dress up and they could eat in those spaces. And then part of that is the material culture behind that, where New Orleans and the South in particular has a history of Black communities, having fundraising suppers, and doing whatever it takes to raise money. I was just reading an article in, I think, NOLA.com, where it was talking about Pee-wee's. That Pee-wee's crab cakes had just opened up in Gentilly, and
Hmm.
he started selling suppers from his house. And
Right.
so these underground economies, start coming into play, and then but they also are able to raise money for specific things in an environment where sometimes you have to think outside of the box, because the opportunities aren't you know thrown at you. There was no loans, there was no financial aid, there was nothing like that. So you had to figure out ways to raise money to educate students, and that continues today, especially specifically in the African American community in New Orleans and throughout the South.
I think too of food trucks, catering businesses, all of
Yes.
those low overhead where people can apply their skills and talents and make it
Absolutely.
happen for themselves. It's just fascinating to hear you tell the story of the
Mhm.
university as a site that was um, a willing participant and part of the landscape, a natural part of the landscape that was an incubator for that.
Absolutely. And then, even just with Jessie Covington Dent, she was President Dent's wife, and she was a class act. fact, when I spoke with Miss Sybil Heidel Moriel, who was Dutch Moriel's wife, she talked a lot about how she was a class act and she just really understood Southern hospitality. And she did whatever it took to collect people and bring them to the table so they could invest in students and invest in the university. And one of those stories is actually in the book, and it talks about Edith Stern and Edgar Stern,
Hmm.
and how they were, some of the first financial supporters for Dillard University. And Edith Stern was from Chicago, and she didn't understand sometimes the racism in New Orleans or in the South. And Marian Anderson, the famous opera singer, was coming to New Orleans, and she was one of the ones who had the first integrated dinners at her house, because she felt it was absurd to not have this wonderful opera singer not be allowed to eat with with all kinds of people. So it was this relationship with philanthropists, with people who supported the arts, of people who also supported the culture of New Orleans, specifically the Creole culture of New Orleans.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Well,
Mm-hmm.
so one of the things I wanted to ask you about was sort of the strategic use of food in the history
Mm-hmm.
of the university. You tell stories
Mm-hmm.
in the book about, such as the Marian Anderson one, but you also
Right.
tell stories about the ways the different administrations, for instance, as you talk about the
Yeah.
different presidencies and the families of the presidents. Maybe tell us a little bit about how you see an instance or two, or thematically, how food has been used strategically. Um, to gather or achieve a strategic aim for the university.
It's always been a uniting force because people love to eat, and people love to eat in New Orleans. People love to cook in New Orleans. So
Right.
if you can imagine, parents, and the extended network outside of the university were always trying to find ways to feed students, and then you also have a robust faculty that comes from all over the world.
Hmm.
And one in particular, when Dr. Samuel DuBose Cook was president, he created this international food festival that was, it was popular for so many years. And in this international food festival, I mean, he had faculty members that from Jamaica, from Nigeria, from Germany. I mean, they were cooking everything, and they shared recipes in a cookbook that they eventually produced to also help raise money for students. So it just kept on the legacy that the Dents left and the traditions that they instilled continued under the Cook administration. And he was known for being a foodie president.
Hmm.
And,
I saw that you mentioned that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And he wrote this, incredible foreword in the cookbook, just explaining the role that food plays in at Dillard, and that it's an art. And it makes so much sense when just see how Dillard is really a beacon of light for the rest of the community, and continues, today to be that light. So,
We should definitely let folks know too, who haven't read the book yet, that
yes,
those recipes are in there, that cookbook is in its entirety,
yeah,
produced in your book. So,
yeah,
and some of those recipes are really interesting. I mean, there are some recipes, I'm very interested in recreating some of these recipes. Some of those recipes, it's like, whoa, I'm not even going to go there, but
right.
I love seeing them. Have you recreated any of those international recipes?
I have. I made jollof rice before.
Uh-huh.
I tried to make, I think there was some Swedish buns in there, and I tried to make
Yeah.
those. I need to practice on that. One of them also we did online, which was really cool. But over COVID, we've been trying to still stay engaged online.
Hmm.
So Chef El Simone at America's Test Kitchen, she was kind enough to test one of the recipes, because this is a community cookbook, and these are recipes that have also been in our archives, and there's so many that we can't test them all, right?
Hmm.
So she made Honolulu hot cakes Ginger Honolulu Hotcakes by Theodore Lawless, who was a Dillard alum. He was a famous dermatologist who was very wealthy.
Hmm.
And he actually donated to build our chapel, which is the Lawless Chapel today, where we have a lot of events. And so she, cooked this recipe. I mean, it's just divine,
Oh, really?
ginger pancakes. And
Okay, all
what
right.
she did was so cool. She made a pineapple syrup, and then she topped it with fresh whipped cream, and it's just divine, and it just shows also how all of the people who contributed recipes, that they were travelers, they were going
Right.
all over the place. And it's an encouragement. I try to use this in the in our food studies curriculum, just to show students that these past alums were traveling all over the world, and they were collecting recipes and sharing it. And even the famous people who submitted recipes, like the famous singer Lena Horne, she had
Hmm.
an East Indian chicken in their recipe. So,
Hmm.
and what I love about community cookbooks, and specifically this cookbook, is to show how diverse and how rich the culture was throughout each generation,
Right. And
Mm-hmm.
what a powerful message to students too, right? Who
Yes,
had, many of them probably first generation college students, to then
absolutely.
see the diversity of the travels and the opportunities of people that they would look up to. And then I
Right.
imagine also from the contributors to one another, right?
Mm,
Their
yes, yes,
messages to one another too about who we are, right?
yes.
As a cohort. Yeah, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, let's talk a little bit about food in times of crisis. You talked a little bit
Mm-hmm.
about 1935 when
Yeah,
the two colleges came together and formed the university in
sure,
your Gentilly campus. That was
sure.
certainly a moment in American history
Mm,
that we could describe as a crisis. Since
yeah,
then, unfortunately, New Orleans and Louisiana have experienced lots of crises.
yes.
We're in one now.
Mm-hmm.
Southwest Louisiana is experiencing a couple simultaneously. Well, we
Sure.
could probably say more than that.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about, from your perspective as an academic and a food
Mm-hmm.
historian, but also as the author of this book and as a community member in New Orleans and on Dillard's campus, what's the role at Dillard and in New Orleans of food amidst crisis?
I think I read an article recently, and I think it was in the Atlantic, about Ron Brody. And he is a teacher here in New Orleans, and he just, exemplifies with so many other folks that live in New Orleans, the idea that we come together in crises, right?
Hmm.
And he was giving away free plants for people to plant food. He would, had this boxes in front of his house where people would just drop off masks, you know, beans, whatever the community needed. And then in the same instance, Dillard University, also in the cafeteria, students who needed help, boxes of food, whatever they needed, our food pantry, people donated to that. And throughout the community, I see more growers, than ever
Okay.
before, which is exciting. To return to that time period, the victory gardens, or even
Hmm.
just, when, a lot of the elders remember their elders actually, growing mirlitons and cucuzzas and all of
Hmm.
these, and so we have to return to a culture of that, because what we found out is, our access to local food is very sensitive. And we have to grow locally, because if a pandemic or anything else happens, again, we cannot always depend on commercial grocery stores to provide food for us. So we have to grow locally, we have to feed locally, and we have to support restaurants, in times of crises. And universities, I think, are staples in the community, who can also facilitate a community network where we can actually share food, and encourage people to grow food and cook food. I mean, we were trying our best to give new recipes and keep people excited online to still cook in their kitchen and put a smile on their face, because we're really going through tough times.
Right.
So, and then you're not going to restaurants as you used to, and you're getting tired of cooking the same food that you know cook every day, and or you're tired of being in the fast food line. So we
Right.
were just trying to give more recipes to people to figure out how they can feed their families, and especially the children who are at home during this crisis, because keeping them satisfied is a whole nother ball game. So
Yeah, absolutely. That's the business that we're in at Feeding America. And you're
right.
absolutely correct. We learned Louisiana had at one point 2 years ago the highest rate of senior food insecurity in the
Yeah,
country, and a
yeah,
state where you can trip over, you can drop a seed accidentally and it grows, right? Because
exactly.
we have such fertile land in Louisiana. But you're right, our connection to the land and our local food systems are very fragile. They require tending. That's
It's
for
a wake up
absolutely
call.
sure.
It's a wake up call for us, I think. And it's
Yeah.
an opportunity for Louisianians to really focus on growing food, even if it's just something small, just growing bell peppers or mirlitons, just something so that you have some fresh food on the table.
Yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely. Um, I was struck by Leah Chase's foreword in her book, in your book. She says, and I want to get the quote right: "If I know what you like to eat, it tells me a lot about you." And
Mm.
so, I have a few follow-ups to that. I like that idea.
Hmm.
So first, what I want to ask you, what do you like to eat?
I
Maybe,
like
yeah, right
everything.
now. Oh, that tells me a lot about you. It
I
tells me
love
you're from
food.
Louisiana.
I love food. I love food. I love Creole. I love West African, Caribbean, Italian, Chinese, Vietnamese,
Mm.
Mexican, Cuban, Puerto Rican. I love it all. As long as it's good food and it's seasoned well, I'm happy. I mean, I also have my go-tos. I love a good bowl of gumbo,
Mhm.
and then when it's done right. I love Dookie Chase's stuffed shrimp. I actually had that last week. That stuffed shrimp is divine. So, I just, and I love to come out to Lafayette, and I love boudin balls and, just amazing. And Laura's too. I love their rice and gravy and their turkey wings and their smothered okra. It's really good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, you said two things. One, that it's seasoned well, right?
Yes.
So that was like,
Yeah.
code, and I got it. And
Yeah.
everyone probably watching this got it.
Yes.
Because I think we all knew we would go on school trips and our teachers would have packets of Tonys in their purse, and those little bottles of Tabasco, right? You know which ones I'm
Yes.
talking
Yes.
about. The ones that
Yes.
Northerners think are like souvenirs, but we
Yes.
know are actually for you to take when you go north. Um, and the second thing you said, which I'd like to come back to, is a good bowl of gumbo. Now,
Yes.
and that between Southwest Louisiana and Southeast Louisiana,
Yes.
we will fight over the color of the roux. But
Absolutely.
and the presence of okra. But
Yes.
that's something we can get into another time.
Well, we do it right. That's the best part, and why I love this book, because there's so much diversity in gumbos throughout Louisiana, but when we all come together when we see some type of video that somebody else is doing in another city, and it's just like, that's not a gumbo, and we
Yeah,
start screaming, and it's
exactly. Or
you know,
I once went to a restaurant in Pittsburgh where I used to live, and it was like a $25 bowl of red beans and rice, and I was like, that costs 4 cents to make. I was
right.
like, that is poor people food.
Oh,
Like,
wow.
you do not, yeah. So that's when you get irate in Louisianian on people. So my follow-up to that is, from your vantage point, what does New Orleans like to eat right now from where you stand?
Um, New Orleans right now is eating a lot of char grilled oysters. I do believe there is a resurgence of Creole cuisine in New Orleans, and particularly after Katrina.
Hmm.
I do believe I see so many entrepreneurs that are opening up restaurants, and they're doing their own interpretation of modern contemporary Creole cuisine. If it's the Munch Factory, Niao's, Heard That Kitchen, Pee-wee's Crab Cakes that just opened, and then the continuation, Dookie Chase restaurant, and just seeing also how their family, the Chase family, is now evolving into the grandchildren really taking over the restaurant,
Uh-huh.
and then bringing back some of, recipes that, I mean, not recipes, dishes that were actually on the menu many years ago. So to see them, now soon going to offer coubillon and dope glacé and,
Uh-huh.
all of these amazing. And then even just seeing, I think I saw on the West Bank, there's a Facebook page where there's a man making coffee and collage. I mean, that just warmed my heart, because you
Wow.
don't see collage, sold. And it's one of the, it's such a classic dish, and just an incredible, and it's so flavorful, and
Uh-huh.
that, serve it with coffee is just incredible. Hmm.
Well, that's exciting. What about your
Yeah.
students? Are your students a reflection of New Orleans, or is it something different happening in terms of what your students are eating, the
Well,
Dillard University student body?
our students are from all over, right?
Hmm.
So we have students from California, and it's interesting because some of our students are first generation, but some of our students are third, fourth generation, and their families went to Dillard, so their
Hmm.
legacy. And so students from California and then other places, they're really interested into vegan
Hmm.
food. And there's a huge movement in New Orleans right now, vegan cuisine. There's Sprouts Organic, there's chefs, really preparing raw cuisine and vegan cuisine and doing an incredible job with it. And so we also had to change as a campus and offer more vegan food to our student population, but we still stayed with the tradition. And Kearney, and I Kearney, Dillard University, Kearney cafeteria, I wrote about it in the book, that on Mondays is tradition, red beans and rice,
Yeah.
and then on Fridays it's fish Friday, so they know to expect, gumbo. They know and they're introduced to it, those who aren't from here, and then those that are from here, it's just like, once they attend Dillard University, it's like being part of family, and it's an extended family. So they feel comfortable in a comfortable space because they're already eating those foods.
Yeah.
Hmm.
How lucky for them. It's a good family to join.
Luckily.
Yeah.
I say that all the time. I
Yeah.
say, just even just the experience of going to Kearney, where it's $8, all you can eat, you can't beat that. And then,
No.
they turn music on just randomly, or people, you could just feel the life and love of the campus by just having lunch at Dillard, especially on Mondays and Fridays and near Christmas.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's exciting. Um, your work, and not just this book, but other work, the Black Hand in the Pot series,
Mhm.
your work in Dillard in general and running the program in African American material culture, you
Mhm.
are making a record. You are documenting and creating a record. Why is it so important for this record that you and your peers and others in the field are creating to exist? And why is it important for this record to grow?
Because so many of our stories go to the grave, you know, and I feel a tremendous obligation and I'm humbled and honored to be able to sit down with some of our elders, and we the lessons I think we learned from COVID is, that life is can be taken away just like
Mhm.
that. And, there's so many stories that we have to tell in Louisiana alone, in New Orleans, and African American communities. And, particularly with African American communities, because, sometimes those stories were painful, And so, next generation, the next generation has no clue what they went through, right? And they don't want to talk
Mhm.
about it because it might have been painful. But we have to document and record these histories, just like the WPA slave narratives when, FDR put that in place. Imagine if we would never know what happened if it wasn't for that, federal project. And
Mhm.
so as historians, we have to document what happened because it gives us a blueprint for the future, the present, the future, and just to really understand the past, or else we'll continue to repeat it.
So
Mhm.
Thank you for that. That leads me to another question. I mean, it's sort of something that I wonder how you reconcile, or if you reconcile thinking about the work of documenting foodways in particular, or material culture. So for example, I'm looking at one recipe in the book when I'm reading it, and you won't be
Mm-hmm.
surprised. I mean, I see Mrs. Darcy Young's $1 million chocolate cake, and I'm like, I would like that, please. That sounds amazing. And I'm thinking, I can create that in my home in Minneapolis, right? And it
Yeah,
can be divorced from all of the context that you set in the
yeah,
document that you've created.
sure.
I can pass that down and remove her name, her story,
Mm-hmm.
and all of
Mm-hmm.
that. So then it's exciting that her recipe and her ingenuity can be recreated, and yet the context can be erased, right?
And I'm hoping that is going to change, right? Because
Mm,
I mean, what's wrong with telling, giving credit to people who wrote these, who made these dishes? I think it gives more, you know, mystery and excitement when you give credit to the
mhm,
person who actually created the dish. And now, when you talk about Miss Darcy Young, that was, um, Andrew Young's, the former mayor of Atlanta and native New Orleanian's mother,
uh-huh,
and so, and what's fascinating, when I got to sit down with Miss Sybil Heidel Moriel, she talked about how she remembered this recipe, her giving this recipe during the Dent administration, and then she gave it again in the Cook administration, right?
mhm,
And they grew up right around the corner from Dillard University, and the father was a dermatologist. And so these were some of his, Mayor Young's favorite, and Ambassador Young, he was a UN ambassador.
mhm,
These were some of his favorite recipes that his mother cooked. So I think it would make sense to give credit to that and tell that story, because that's a New Orleans story, and that he went
mhm.
on to Atlanta to become this incredible, ambassador for the world, and, the mayor and all of this. And he came right from Gentilly.
Right. So
So
it's just a risk we have to take, right? I
it
guess
is,
it's what it
it is,
sounds like, right? It's a better,
it
it's
is.
it's a fuller world for having told the story.
Right. And I mean,
And yeah.
if you put a gumbo out there and you don't say it's from Louisiana, is that going to be the future, where we don't say it's from Louisiana,
Mhm.
just forget the history of where it came from? That would be a sad day, but I don't think we will ever let that happen.
No. Well, listen, that's true. And they will mess it up. It'll be
Right, right.
two iterations later, it won't be worth eating. So,
Right,
yeah,
exactly, exactly.
true. It'll have carrots in it or something.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Oh, no, no, no.
They will. So another thing that I noticed, and is that you put yourself in the book, right? So as I move through the book and we move toward the recipes, more modern recipes, that
Hmm.
you've shared some of your own recipes there.
I
And
did.
one in particular is I believe, a seafood gumbo, a gumbo recipe. I believe it's a
Yeah,
seafood gumbo recipe.
yes.
And from my experience as a Louisianian, I think that is both incredibly generous and brave, right?
Mm.
Because one, we all want it, and two, you open yourself up to scrutiny. Um, and so I'm just curious, how did you choose, as you're moving through this document of the university, and you are, of course, a university member, how did you choose what of your own to include in
I
that?
decided to choose one of my own because I wanted to, just kind of show what a New Orleans gumbo looks like today. I
Hmm.
wanted to document that, because when you look at some of the old cookbooks, even the Times Picayune, Creole cookbook, some of the other, cookbooks from the 19th century, gumbo changes, right? And it depends
Hmm.
on where you live as well. So, in New Orleans, there's the uptown, version of gumbo. There's the downtown, version of gumbo. If you go to Miss Leah's, at Dookie Chase, it's more of a red gumbo, and it's similar to Seventh Ward gumbos, where where the sausage, the Creole sausage made by Bashman family or Bocrason family, it has a red tint to it. So it kind of colored that water. And if you go uptown, they call it muddy water.
Hmm.
Historically, they would call it muddy water. So, I think I wanted to put my own in there just because I was tired of seeing other people in other cities, just destroy it. So if you're going to cook it, just do it right, and put some hot sausages in there, do some
Uh-huh.
things that we do here, right? And then I also appreciated Miss Sybil, who added her grand's filet gumbo,
Hmm.
and she has a nice story in there about her grandmother's filet gumbo. And then it just shows how diverse gumbos have been throughout, the centuries. And it continues to change, and it might change again, but like you said, I hope it doesn't get to the point where the people putting carrots in it. But I don't think that's going to happen in our community. Hopefully not.
No, not at all. Well, we wouldn't call it that. We would just call it like swamp stew or something. I don't know. We'd call it, I don't know. We would just call it something else, right? Like winter stew. I don't know. With a
Right.
roux. I don't know. Yeah.
But what's interesting is we use what's available to us. And so, the Holy Trinity, the mirepoix had carrots in it, but our Holy Trinity has celery, bell peppers, and onions, so we use whatever is available to us to create gumbos. But, I just carrots, no. Don't do
Right.
carrots.
Yeah. Agreed. Well, Zella, this has been such a great conversation. I so
Thank
appreciate
you.
the chance to dig into some of the issues that you navigated when you were putting together the book and some of the issues that you navigate just in your work with students and in your own research more broadly. So
Thank
I
you.
really appreciate that. And so for
Thank you.
all of the fans of the UL Press, Zella's book is available right now from UL Press. It's full of all the recipes from the cookbooks throughout time that we described. From Dillard University, as well as stories, anecdotes, and histories of the university, especially as they relate to food. So thanks
Yes.
very much. We look forward to lots
Thank you
more from
so much.
you.
And I'm curious if anybody makes Eleanor Roosevelt's huckleberry dessert. I would love for you guys to take a picture and please send it my way.
Sounds good. Thanks very
Okay.
much.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.